Welcome to Boost CYAC webinar series. This is Mireille and I will be hosting the webinar today with Danielle Nadeau. Before we begin our session, there is a few quick housekeeping points. The PowerPoint presentation will be both in French and in English. Feel free to download the presentation by clicking on Documents on your right, the document button on your right. There will be a question and answer during the last 5 minutes of each presentation. To submit your question in French or in English, please go to the toolbar on your right, click on Messaging, and then Participant and type your question. You can submit your question at any time during the presentation. If you are watching this webinar in a group, please enter the number of participants in the group by clicking on Messaging and then Participant. For participants listening in English, click on the floor at the bottom left of the screen and select English because both presentations will be done in French. So I repeat, if you want to listen it in English, click on the floor at the bottom left of the screen and select English. So I will begin the presentation. Pourquoi avons-nous besoin d'un protocole?
Why do we need a revised version of the NICHD protocol for forensic interviews? My name is Mireille. I'm a professor at the University of Montreal, and I work with the Maria Vincent Inter-University Research Center. First of all, I'm going to be speaking to you about the NICHD protocol. For those of you who don't know it, it's a protocol that was developed at the National Institute of Child and National Development. I'm going to be comparing the original version with the new revised version. I'm going to give you some examples of these changes, and in the end, I'm going to present certain data that has come out of research regarding the effectiveness of the revised version. So the NICHD protocol was developed by Michael Lamb and his colleagues, and that was at the end of the 80s, or that was at the end of the 90s, and then there was a book that was published in 2008. And it was done to translate research recommendations into operational steps that increase the likelihood of obtaining a complete and accurate information. So the first one was focused on the children's cognitive abilities. So in terms of the children's memory, suggestibility, and also their capacity in terms of the language. So these objectives were achieved because several studies did show that the protocol allowed an increase in terms of the amount of details compared to a traditional method. It also allowed an increase of the disclosure rate by 10%, as well as open-ended questions by the interviewers. So that that allowed for better quality answers. So I just want to add, this is a structured protocol. There's different phases and they are clearly identified, as well as the type of question. So what's the reality in terms of the obstacles in the field? There's a large number of children who do not disclose. 34% in some cases. And in Quebec, in a study that we carried out, we observed that out of 116 children, 22% did not disclose during the interview. So they did not disclose or make a declaration to the police. And if we look who these children are, 61% were under the age of 6 years, and 81% were under the age of 7 years. So we didn't have a difference in our study between boys, a number of boys and girls. Some studies have showed that boys are more resistant to disclosing. And it's not surprising that in inter-family, there is less disclosure than in outside the family. So this reality on the ground, that means that interviewers are often struggling with reluctant or resistant children. We've also observed in these studies that there were few statements of support during the interviews. And if they're present, they were not dependent or contingent on the child's needs. The child was not reassured during that time in terms of their anxiety or resistance. Research also indicates that children who do not speak, they are resistant from the beginning of the interview, which means that we can try and counter these difficulties at the beginning of the interview. So what is the objective of the NICHD protocol, the revised version? It is to take into account the motivational and relational aspects of the children so that children will have, so there will be more tools faced with this reality. And it was developed on the basis of several studies looking at the dynamics of interviews and as these children were resistant to revealing, as well as the characteristics of children and interviewers. So now, what are the difference between the two versions on the left of your screen? You see the original version of the NICHD, and on the right, we have the revised version. First of all, I'm going to present to you the modifications that were done in terms of the structure of the protocol, in terms of the different phases, and then I'm going to come back to each one of the different phases to see what has been modified by showing examples. So at the beginning, the standard protocol had an introduction, which we present the camera and what it serves for. And this was maintained, but we also added a welcome to the child. And then, whereas in the standard, we just put on the ground rules in terms of the purpose, whereas these two phases were reversed. In other words, rapport building and ground rules. So first we talked about in the revised version on rapport building, and then we had questions that were more specific about the emotions. And then we get to the ground rules, which was modified compared to the original protocol. And then in the two protocols, we pass to the episodic memory training. And then after that, the transition to the substantive content is what is the next phase. So in the revised protocol, there's a transition to this offering support, and I will give you examples after. And the transfer is, this transition is done by way of 10 non-suggestive questions. And the revised protocol, they resist this additional interviews. Well, there is a possibility, but Danielle will speak to you about that later on. And then it's the investigation of the events. And in the revised, we continue doing it in the same way as in the original protocol. And it ends by the phase of disclosure and the closing. And we then would close that interview. So now if we go back to the pre-declarative or pre-substantive phase, what we see is that we have, compared to the revised version, we have a welcoming, we show the cameras, the microphones if applicable. Of course, it's very recommended to film these interviews. So for example, we'll say, hello, Make, that's the child's name. You're going to, research has showed that by using this, by capturing the child's name, happy to meet him, then that's going to allow him to better be able to give details. So I'm going to give you the name Marie. Hello, Marie. I'm happy to meet you today. How are you? So then we're going to, my name is Mireille and my job is to speak to children. Are you comfortable? So then we go back and we make sure that the child is comfortable. And if that is not the case, then we're going to take time to take care of the child's state. And then after that, we go to the building the rapport and narrative training. And we can, like in the original version, we ask the child, are there things that you like to do? And did you have fun at daycare, at school? And then the unpleasant things at daycare or at school. So the objective, by adding the emotions, is that research has shown that details associated with emotions are more rich. They're better recorded in the memory. And we realize that in the interviews, children that speak a lot or sometimes not even at all about their emotions. So by introducing this, having them speak about something that's pleasant and unpleasant, that increases the probability is that they will tell and use their emotions when discussing the abuse that they received. Examples of support that we can offer during this period in order to create a rapport. Well, thank you for sharing with me. That helps me get to know you, or I'm happy. I'm glad I'm starting to get to know more about you. Now, if we see there's a lot of resistance, and we have like no visual context, we can say, Marie, if they're not looking at you, Marie, can I see your eyes? Let me see your eyes, sorry. Or Marie, I see you're crying. Tell me what's going on so I can help. So we have support suggestions to offer the child. With respect to the pre-substantive phase, it's a question of explaining the ground rules and practice, and the research clearly shows that by practicing these rules, that brings more of a chance that the children will use it. So we're going to practice, not just say that the ground rules. So, for instance, saying that the child can say whether he doesn't understand, whether he or she doesn't know the answer, or correct the interviewer if the interviewer has made a mistake, and about the importance of telling the truth today. So these pursued objectives are to counter the child's suggestibility. And then the following phase is the episodic memory training. So the objective that is pursued here is to learn the task of telling a free story with recall memory and understanding the invitation questions. These are not questions that are used every day by the parents, so they need a little bit of practice in order to be listened to, and if we will explain how that is done. But it's important that the memory, these kinds of questions, must be between 5 and 7 minutes, because otherwise the child will be the child will be tired and he will have less energy during the declarative time. So we have to look at the time we devote to this, the child's comfort level, and whether they have a feeling of competence. So this episodic memory training, it's in order, we want this to be pleasant, in other words, by asking a question about the child's birthday from the beginning to the end, and just letting the child keep going. And then once we have the entire story, then we make a minimum of 3 time segmentations, invitations, once the whole story. So from the time you went to your friend's place, from the time you went to play, and then after that, we're going to make a minimum of 3 cued invitations, like tell me more about your birthday, about playing with your child. And with this episodic memory training, we don't make directive questions. We're going to practice with the child we want the child to respond about things that the child knows about. Now, for the transition to the declarative part, that is done through a set of 10 proposed questions and a number of suggestions during clean moments to help the interviewer deal with this resistance. So, for example, we can say to the child, Marie, I really want to know when something happens to children, and that's why I'm here. We could also say, Marie, here kids can talk about good things and bad things that have happened to them. So if the child doesn't invite, or the child does not is not giving the declarative content, we can say this, or we can say to the child, you told me a lot about yourself. I feel I know you better, and you can tell me more about things, about good things, bad things that have happened to you. If we have independent evidence which raises suspicion, we can do interventions that are more suggestive. For example, Marie, people are worried about you and I want to know if something may have happened to you. Or Marie, if something has happened to you and you want it to stop, you can tell me about it. We can also say, Marie, what would happen if you were to tell me? Or Marie, has somebody told you not to tell me? Or not to tell? We can also say, sometimes children think that if something happened to them, it's their fault, but children are not responsible for the things that happen to them. If it's clear and it happens that the child does not want to speak, the child just doesn't want to speak about it, we can make the following interventions. Marie, I understand that you're ashamed to speak about it. Let's start, and I'll try and help you with it. Or Marie, I know that you're afraid. Tell me more about that. So the research that was done about the revised NICHD protocol says that we have a disclosure rate of 18% more in the intra-family context with compared to the standard version. So 18% more in difficult situations, because it's more difficult for them when the aggression or the abuse happened within the family context. Therefore, the protocol from this point of view fulfills its objective to better deal with the child's resistance by being given more support and creating a working relationship with them. The other result, or the other studies that were done because this protocol was tested before being rolled out. So we know that it works. And so we don't have as much suggestibility. So we have noticed that there is more support than with the standard interviews. So there's more support than with the standard version. And the pre-substantive phase is working in terms of the transition to the declarative content. So there can be phrases to motivate, to encourage the child, like you've told me a lot, that helps me understand a lot. You're working hard and that helps me understand. So ideally, we want to have a little more support during that phase. Or the researchers are maybe searching for evidential areas, and they can handle the relationship aspect at the same time. We've also observed the fact that they're less resistant in the revised version. We have a 32% increase in the amount of detail, and that's important with this revised version to have access to more of the child's information. And there's a little more emotion, and that which is reported in the declarative substantive phase. And we see a little bit more in terms of details as well than compared to the original version. So if you want to read more about it, if you speak French, I would encourage you to see the book Recueillir la parole de l'enfant, témoin aux victimes, gathering statements from children, witnesses or victims, from theory to practice, and those who speak English to see the latest book from Michael Lem and colleagues, Tell Me What Happened, Questioning Children About Abuse. So that's it. So I finished my presentation. I'm going to see whether there's any questions. I have some time to listen to your questions. If you have questions, I'm going to give you a few minutes to write them now. I understand that it was a brief presentation. It was sufficiently clear. But if you do have any other questions, you can add them in. And maybe I can respond in the end. So now I'm going to pass the floor to Danielle Nadeau, who is going to do the second part of the presentation. And thank you. Hi, everyone, and thank you, Mireille. I would like to welcome you. I'm going to share my screen now with my presentation. So it's wonderful now with the they're doing some construction around my building today, and as I'm doing work from home, I hope it doesn't bother you. All right, so I'm going to turn now to my presentation. Mireille, can you tell me whether you can see my screen? Yes, I do see it. Perfect. So I'm really happy to present the interview project of investigation. It's a project that we're carrying out with the SIAM, Integrated Services on Abuse and Mistreatment. And you can see I'm a psychologist and researcher, as it said in the first slide. And I just want to thank the ability to carry out this project due to several several collaborators, including the police, Sandra Lebrec, who's a sergeant detective with the Service of Police of the city of Lévis, and also, of course, Mireille, who's with us today. So today I'm going to briefly present to you the project and project team, and then I'm going to discuss about the work, some of the different adaptation of the models to the Quebec legal framework, and what is a little different. There has been the initial emergence of something. This is the PERSIS. We're going to adapt the model here, but I would like to insist about the way we carried these things out. First of all, we talk about clinical reality and how we have adapted the extended forensic interview that existed in other jurisdictions, and we have evidence of that. And so the essential purpose is to adapt our EFI models to procedures which will allow the investigators to carry out these developmentally sensitive extended forensic interviews. So this is the translation that we have, sensitive extended forensic interviews over more than one session for some children who were reluctant to disclose. And we are going to speak about this developmentally sensitive interview in terms of other projects, and they're adapted to other programs like in Toronto, the SAFE program. And these offer some young victims more than one chance to disclose, within a context in which they have to preserve a certain appearance of a credibility that we need to have. And this is taking into account sensitivity issues relation to trauma. So we have three things to take into account when we look at our program. First of all, the fact that our investigation interviews with children in Quebec have to be carried out obligatorily by the police, who are trained with the NICHD protocol. These investigators have a university education as well as a special certification in order to do investigations on sexual assault. The second characteristic, the police corps have staff that are dedicated to sexual assault and to children. So these police interviewers, investigators also have a specialty in this. They also do interviews on all types of crimes. And also with our CAC, we have two types of organization of police services. We have to find a model that adapts to two different realities. It's challenging, but if we look at the necessary specialties that are required in terms of the medical aspects as well, this model will allow in an equitable manner to share and to our specialized this will allow us to share our specialized knowledge. Sorry if I'm reading it. So we have a team. We have a team that is made up of research, CIAM advocates, and we have three types of police on the CIAM, as well as the Child Protection Agency, from the Crown Prosecutors officers, as well as prosecutors, other prosecutors. Why is this important? It's important for all of us to coordinate the care and the investigation in terms of negligence and abuse. And this has to be done beforehand, which is done in an interministerial protocol, which started in Quebec at the beginning of the 2000s, and it is multi-sectoral. That brings us to the third parameter. parameter. And before putting into this project, the fact of it that an extended interview also has to be in the current existing phase of what we have in CIAM has to be under the multi-sectoral phase. And in order for this to be viable, this has to be done in an integrated manner and not just based on certain person who is interviewing the child. So it's like a shared process which is developed in certain jurisdictions like the Barnaps. So we have three important characteristics, and I'm going to go back to this in a more operational manner gradually in my presentation. So with respect to the pertinence of the project, they have to do, there's three different premises. And this was based on focus groups and evaluations that were carried out by professionals. Several of them felt that they didn't have enough power, or they were convinced when the child had been abused, but the child is reticent to disclose. So the beginning of our work was to carry out a review of the literature, which will allow us to better document the problems in terms of practical issues and existing and we looked at existing models that exist in different jurisdictions around the world. Now I'm going to go a little quicker because Mireille already talked a lot to you about this, but we do know that in clinical studies, 10 to 15% only in situations where a child is going to come to the attention of the authorities. So the absence of this disclosure or partial disclosure, these are phenomenons that are short, and in spite of the NICHD, 1/3 to 1/2 of children do not disclose by just one single interview, even with certain studies, even when there are filmed abuse. So we see that the disclosure is sometimes it is not disclosed. But we can see now that in terms of the dialogue of the victim or the child, this depends on the child's environment, the acts that he or she has received or abusive, but there is some partial, there is some denial, or then there is sometimes some partial, or then some disclosure. There are several factors that are in synergy, work one with the other, and this presents several similarities between the different type of mistreatment between children. So we can see that the child, for example, could be a strategy to regularize the child's emotions, or maybe emotion for a child that evolved, or the child's evolvement or progression. But we can see that it happens on many levels without denying the fact that the child perhaps was not even a victim, but the child has to be able, this partial or reticence in terms of the child needs to be able to make this disclosure in a environmentally atmosphere. As Mireille mentioned, their NICHD protocol was revised. And I'm going to go back a little bit of this. There's more time now to build trust with the child. It becomes more, without being more directive, suggestive, or putting pressure on the child, or even gives the possibility of closing and postponing the interview if it's necessary. So we're entering into a zone that requires more from the service organization. And why? Why? because the investigative interview that is extended must be a planned and systematic process to carry out. Several interviewers with the same interviewer for the purpose of gathering information about the allegations of mistreatment or abuse towards the child. There's the Safe Toronto program that is inspiring, and it has showed that these extended interviews work in the Canadian context, that some 2 to 3 in the preparatory phase could be done, which is adequate in terms of providing the possibility of the child who is reticent in terms of disclosing and against the supposed perpetrator. Also, in other in other kinds of atmospheres, we can see the positive benefits of the FI demonstrated over time without having a negative impact on his testimony or from what we can see in the interview. So our plan, as I had already mentioned before, the first elements that are done in our program is that all these interviews should be done by a police investigator. And then extending the NICHD are phases which for more than one session, and this can be done through a multi-sectoral approach. And that's what we're working on in Quebec. And also we have to consider that there's there's additional availability of many resources because there are issues in terms of scarcity or lack of resources. So that's why it's not being done. So now we're looking at all the different, on this chart, we can see that the care after a situation that is given by the authorities, this was presented at the beginning. And we can show the nature of the work that we must do with our team. We can see that in the blue. In the blue, that's what we want to construct or propose. So we also knew that some model programs which were extended and that will benefit the children and when they arrive at a CYAC. And the other one, after just a first non-suggestive standard interview, could be non-conclusive. So there could be serious doubts whether the child was a victim of abuse. So the NCAC recommended a mechanism of hybrid references, which would be very pertinent for the SIAM, because are the authorities with us, the situation of a child will quickly be discussed through triage and the process that is shown in the upper part of this figure. And so through the CM triage process, we can see whether the forensic interview, yes or no, is recommended. And this is done with a hybrid reference system throughout the work. And we had to look with our team we had to look from the beginning to the final product, and all the different, each one of these people, and we, for instance, 3 to 5 controversial questions within the established questions was done. And then after, the investigator will be able to act as a moderator, and all the decisions were made by the participants by consensus. Each one of the decisions that are approved were then presented to Mireille, and to Sandra and myself someday after each meeting to doubly validate it scientifically speaking. And then it was presented in a working group for the next, in order to reach a final consensus. We also developed and wrote the program piece by piece, including tools in order to support the entire process. Now, with respect to the reference criteria, this is aimed at the child who refuses to disclose or does it partially discloses, even in the presence where we have proof, or in where there are facts that are unresolved, but the multidisciplinary team suspects that there was abuse. For children, preschoolers who have not previously disclosed, or some children with some intellectual development disabilities, or poly-victimized children who are victims of human trafficking or have been under threat. In terms of the basic premise, it has to happen over a short period of time, or even on the same day, and the members has to be carried out. It has to be a multidisciplinary intervention if you carry out these extended interviews. So the roles that are carried out with the task assigned to these members, they have to verify the factual part, and then they this is planned out, this is shared in a multidisciplinary manner. And by sharing this has to be done by consensus and by each member of the team. The idea is that everyone puts their effort to work in a complementary, integrated within the current framework. For instance, be it the legal framework as well as the protection framework. Another basic premise, and it's not even written here, but it's worth mentioning, is the one that is linked to the best interests of the child, whether the child should be referred to an interview for more than one session. This is a question that has to continue worrying the multidisciplinary team members. To each one, they have to look at it. And at the end, we have the first draft of the adapted triage process CM model. For instance, the references or the referrals that would be made, list of verification or checklist with respect to the data, and there is an engagement sheet to be given to the parents or caregivers, the guardians. And there has to be designated to these particular clinicians that are receiving this. They are not specifically the same police that are going to be dedicated to the particular actually carrying out the interview. But then we have a feasibility phase, and so we decided to do was to test this feasibility model, and then we looked at the ground practitioners. So we were able to look at our entire investigative team, the police that are devoted to the social worker, Child Protection Agency, Crown prosecutors, in order to discuss with them the first proposition of the model. And then from there, we had to adjust it into three important elements. The first one, the fact that there's going to be another phase before extending the child or referring the child to an extended interview process. We have to look at the existing recorded video, if that was the case, in order to assure that it seems to be in the best interest of the concerned child to refer the child to an extended interview. So we're speaking of complex situations here. Also, it's necessary to foresee a multidisciplinary approach there in order to support the interviewer in more complex situations. Secondly, we have to reflect and propose a means in order to better understand the knowledge to use the NICHD revised protocol. And because of the pandemic, it's still being deployed in Quebec. And all the investigators still are not updated with all of the revised or the information on the NICHD. We also have a certain degree of transparency by everything that was developed within the model. So we designed in each one of the three types of police, we'll have an investigator for the developmental extended, the EFI, the extended forensic interview. We have to review this and also there has to be a good credibility, and they will support the analysis of the investigation regarding the abuse right to the end of the interviews. And this particular person will carry out telephone conferences with multidisciplinary until the end of the whole interview process. And this particular investigator will carry out these interviews with the child. And not the one who's responsible for the entire investigation. So the one who's responsible of the file will be on the other side of a one-directioner mirror in the interview room, and they will engage the police in the backup. Because in order to have some sort of a backup, and there will be other members of the multidisciplinary team, travel, social workers, and they will be kept at those involved in the Attorney General's office, Child Protection Services, if it's possible, in order to allow and the lawyers are not in contact with them during the entire investigation. So that is the role of the child advocate, and it's essential to assure the respect of these reference criteria in order to support the multidisciplinary team, and in order to have this cohesion, and in order to monitor the situation. Up until the pandemic arrived, we continued 9 situations. In 3, we carried out extended interviews. And in this last one, 2 sessions of extended interviews were carried out with a child. Now the work has been taken up again, and right now after the webinar, I am off to go to a discussion about an upcoming situation. So things are now taking their course amongst this deuxième wave thing. But what's important to say about this? We have observed that this intermediary process is during, what you can see on your screen, these processes have all shown that there's certain elements of filtering in this multidisciplinary approach to give information to the investigators. The members of the multidisciplinary team on the ground who have experienced the process, all this is considered to be quite valuable. So whether the decision was made or not made, it has to be done in the best interests of the child to decide whether an extended interview will be made. So even without an extended interview, we feel that this is mobilizing in terms of this can be a difficult situation for the interviewers, because if we have supplementary information which can be done through a mandate, and they realize that they can obtain this under mandate, so we don't want to have to return to interviews with a child to see the missing details in order to carry out an accusation, because people have managed to to speak about these details together. In this particular case, I think that it was a first interview that was done in the conclusions, and then in the other case, without an extended interview. This analysis process is something that is desired for care because it allows the multidisciplinary team to be that for the child that is susceptible, and it is a good recommendation based on scientific research, and it's the disclosure is considered to be a dynamic process. So what I want to tell you is that there's a lot of different processes. Sorry about saying process so many times in one sentence, but what we can see is that is at the heart of our project in order to deal with the controversies or the resistance that have been mentored for those children who do not want to disclose within a within a legal framework, and these children will be able to have this for more than one. There is some danger of contamination. We have to use techniques that are non-suggestive, and we have to be able to do this in order to be able to better protect the child. So I want to tell you that we still have some further steps, and we want to be able to above all, for the admissibility of children's declarations, we need them to be able to be accepted as proof. So it has to be rigorous to allow us to be able to observe that there's characteristics of situations that have been referred, and there are cases where the extended interview is not necessary, and we want to carry out we want to follow up, do some long-term follow-up, and that was the perceptions of these field practitioners have to be followed above time. And also we need to have we need to be able to have some tracking over the long term. I want to thank you for your attention for this section, and now I'm going to leave my screen sharing and go back to the question period. I don't know, Mireille, if you were able to look to see if there's any questions that have come in, and yes, indeed, there are 2 questions regarding the part that I presented in the first. Someone is asking about when the revised version was done. The first research was done in 2014. It was explained in a more detailed manner in 2018, so that is quite recent. For example, in Quebec, we just began this autumn to give information and organize information for investigators regarding this revised version. So this is for the ground practitioners that are out in the field, for them to be working on the NICHD. The other question, which was asked about, how do we deal with a child that does not have emotions that in terms of something bad or inadequate has come through, and how does that affect the questions that we asked? The protocol says that there are some questions about, do you think somebody did something that wasn't good? Do you think they did something that made you feel uncomfortable? And if the child has a tendency of not answering or telling us, well, it wasn't something bad, I think we can simply just not argue, just say, I'm interested in knowing about what happened to you. Tell me about it. Even if it was something bad, I'd like you to talk to me about it. And the protocol foresees that with the revelation or lack of revelation, revealment of the child, we can use suggestive, but without stating or naming who the aggressor is, we can say to the child, I heard that at such and such a place, there was, for example, that somebody had asked you to touch their penis. Tell me a little bit more about that. So we can suggest the actions regardless of whether the child considers the gestures to be, or the actions to be good or bad ones. And using some of the intervention techniques that I mentioned, it's my role to know when things happen, even if they're bad things. Sometimes it can be important for you to tell me about things that happen to you. And as I told you, these are situations that are a little more delicate. And if the child mentions something, you just decide to get the child to speak about it, but not to judge the wrongdoing, rather just to talk about the child or the incidents that happened to the child. That's a very complete response, Mireille. Thank you. I see that there's no other questions that have entered. And it's worth mentioning to the participants, Pearl, you were telling us earlier that people can contact us through email or if they have any questions after the presentation, and if they want to know a little more. Well, we still have some 2 or 3 minutes. If you have any questions, that would be a real pleasure to answer. We hope that everything was clear for you and we didn't go too quickly for the translator. But I really want to thank you for your participation in this webinar, and if there are any questions that come about after, you can communicate with us. It would be a pleasure to answer. Thank you.